I'm about to admit to you a rather unsurprising truth. I love weird tennis stories. Sure, I'm an avid follower of modern-day professional tennis and very opinionated on many of the current events that surround it, but truthfully, it's the strange, borderline bizarre tales of the sport's past that has most piqued my interest even from a young age. And of all the weirdness that tennis has given me to make videos about over the years, there's one story, one product specifically, that's fascinated and outright perplexed me more than anything else since I first read about it as a kid. From what sparse info I could gather at the time, the story involved a pair of brothers, the Battistones, who played professional doubles together at a fairly high level, even competing in Grand Slam main draws. Everything about them, from their looks to their strokes, initially appeared as unremarkable as the rest of their competition. That was, until you noticed what they were holding, not just in one hand, but both. It wasn't an illusion. The brothers really were playing pro tennis together with custom-built, two-handled tennis rackets, and surprisingly, winning. As within a 3-year span, their creation had propelled them from obscure nobodies to top 100 ranked title contenders. My imagination ran wild questioning this racket concept, its purpose, how it was made, and what it would be like to play with. But you have to remember, this was back in the mid-2000s. Though the internet could provide me with their official ATP rankings and enough low-resolution photos to at least confirm the brothers and the rackets indeed existed, YouTube was still in its infancy, and the best I could find at the time was this pixelized mess, which didn't help. And that serve? Nothing about this stunt seemed real. That was, until I decided to look into it once again almost 20 years later. And let me tell you, though I usually anticipate these videos having interesting twists or surprises, I never expected to find myself in the middle of one.
You prefaced all this by saying that you like to, learn about weird stories in tennis and sports, and that we definitely check the box and check all the boxes in that area. So I can speak for myself.
This is Brian and Dan Battistone, the aforementioned duo that helped make this story possible in every sense. On a whim, I reached out to them directly, hoping they could fill in a few gaps, since the internet still seems to know as much about this racket as it did 2 decades ago. Thankfully, the brothers were super gracious with their time, and let me in on the fact that from the beginning, it wasn't even about tennis.
Something I was not highly ranked. I think both of us relate to the game just because of basketball, really.
As it turns out, Brian and Dan are sons of the late Sam Battistone Jr., former owner of the Utah Jazz, and their experience of growing up in the direct vicinity of NBA stars instilled into them the desire to one day be, if not basketball players themselves, professional athletes of some sort. So serious were they about basketball, in fact, that upon hearing a coach lay out the benefits behind ambidextrous ball handling and shooting, the brothers put concerted effort for a time into learning how to do almost everything in life with their non-dominant hands, from brushing their teeth, to eating, to handwriting, to eventually, just for fun, tennis. Brian in particular incessantly practiced and worked on his ability to hit lefty forehands, overheads, and serves almost as effectively as he could with his right hand to throw off any opponent, whilst the more traditional playing Dan soon went on to play Division I college tennis with dreams of taking his game to the top. Though undeniably talented, with decent junior rankings and signature play styles, the fact remained that in the grand scheme of things, both were just average players at best, with neither possessing the special quality or it factor needed to survive the pro tour. Their results, or lack of, proved as much. Dan left college to pursue a professional career, but after little success, eventually turned to regular full-time employment. Whereas Brian was content simply practicing and honing his unique strokes on public courts throughout Southern California, testing his game against anyone willing to take him on.
And I would meet a lot of really interesting people, right? And one time I was just tossing the racket from one hand to the other. I was hitting forehands on both sides. I was hitting overheads and serves. And Lionel Burt's son came up to me and says, "Hey, there's something I need to show you. My dad invented this two-handled racket, and you don't have to be passing the racket back and forth from each hand to the other." And like most people, when he said two-handled racket, I just thought, oh, that's a little crazy. I don't know if, I couldn't even really conceptualize it, right? I just thought, it's probably nothing that I'd be really interested in using, but I'll take a look.
So as it turned out, Brian merely stumbled upon the racket through a chance meeting with the son of this man, Lionel Burt. An amateur golfer and prolific inventor since his youth, Lionel, after decades of being, quote, bent and twisted on the same side, sought out tennis as a remedial aid for his body, but wasn't content with how modern-day rackets still favored what he believed to be lopsided, dominant hand playstyles. Believing that a natural and balanced game involved using both sides of the body equally and in the exact same manner. Now, to his credit, you will find that young kids learning the sport often instinctively use both hands on the racket for all strokes. That is, until instructors train it out of them. But around the time that Lionel began developing his idea, the best player in the world just so happened to be a girl who did exactly that. So years later, after a brief introduction and one singular 45-minute hitting session where Brian demonstrated his ambidextrous playstyle, Lionel laid all his cards on the table. He revealed his custom-designed, prototype-ready, and fully symmetrical two-handled racket, along with a patent on its design, a certification letter from the ITF approving the racket's use in all professional tournaments, and an offer. If Brian and Dan took the racket on tour full-time, he'd give them 50% of the company. It took a bit of convincing. By this point, Brian was 28 and Dan was 30, with families, jobs, and failed stints on the circuit years prior. But inspired by Lionel's proposal, and more importantly, the broader vision behind what the racket represented, one that reimagined how tennis could be played, the brothers accepted the offer, took to the tour, and took ownership in the company. A company, to my initial shock, that they still own and operate today. See, I came into this video thinking that the rackets were rare relics of tennis past, a gimmicky footnote for the history books that'd make for a fun story. But instead, I found a pair of brothers who are as passionate about this concept today, if not more so, than they ever were, who continue to manufacture, market, and distribute dual-handled rackets to a small but devoted community of players. By the end of the call, they had almost even sold me on the idea.
Yeah, I think I might have to go to the website myself and buy one of these. Honestly, actually, it might be a good segue in the video to actually try one. I'll keep that thought in mind.
We'll take care of you. We'll take care of you.
And, true to his word, a week later this package arrived, containing 2 variants of a racket I never thought I'd actually ever see in person. Though I threw in the part about hitting with it for this video half-jokingly, actually having one in my possession stirred back up that question I'd asked myself all those years ago. What kind of player could I be with the two-handled racket? So, a self-imposed challenge was set. 10 days to learn the ins and outs of mastering this thing, culminating in a match with one of my hitting partners that would put my potential and the rackets to the test. Now, I'll preface this by saying that neither Brian, Dan, or their company Natural Tennis sponsored, paid for, or had any part in the making of this video other than generously donating the rackets, something they offered to do without much prompting, I should add. However, I will provide a link to their website in the description if you're interested in checking out their products yourself. With 2 models to choose from, the racket I opted to train with was the Freestyle, an upgraded version of the original signature red one they used on tour. Which is a shame actually, as I rather preferred that look. The racket's technical specs are remarkably normal, not too dissimilar to what you'd find on most other modern sticks. Though the overall look, its paint job, graphics, and typography give it a somewhat DIY aesthetic, the overall finish and construction quality is superb. Take away the second handle, and you'd be forgiven for thinking this thing was plucked off the shelf of a major racket company. As you can imagine, that wasn't always the case. Lionel Burt had provided the brothers with a functional prototype, but it amounted to little more than a crude proof of concept at best. Building an unproven racket that would somehow hold up to professional play standards was up to them now.
And it started with, I'm not even kidding you, it started with chopping off like head prestige rackets and going to the welder. We were putting these like welded aluminum handles and using like an epoxy glue to try to, pair them with a frame. And I'd be playing a tournament and it'd start snapping in half. It was just
Fortunately, though Brian and Dan weren't cut out to be engineers, they managed to make a connection early on with someone who was. Jim Easton, owner of Easton Sports, a former powerhouse in US sports gear manufacturing, took a liking to their idea, and through his contacts with Wilson Sporting Goods, managed to design and fabricate for them a truly professional, dual-handled racket model that faithfully executed Lionel's original vision. One that no longer felt gimmicky or contrived, but rather natural. Truly, I was pleasantly surprised to find that in contrast to its radical design appearance, it didn't feel at all awkward or outright foreign to hold. In fact, some practice swings on my backhand side felt exceptionally fluid, with the second handle providing the kind of extra leverage I felt I personally needed. A promising sign, since, as you'll see in a minute, that shot is kind of a disaster. But enough chatter. I'm here to officially proclaim that hitting with the Freestyle...
Whoa. Oh boy.
Will take some time to get used to. See, because the handles are angled in proportion to the racket head rather than perfectly straight, it requires the player to slightly readjust their contact point with the ball further out in front of the body. making cross-court shots initially quite difficult. To even get a ball to land on the left side of the court at first, I had to mentally aim for the green area outside of the doubles alley. But as with any new skill, my brain gradually started wiring things together, and before long I was feeling fairly comfortable with the forehand. So, a bit nervously, I switched over to the backhand.
Okay.
Now, backhands have always been, by far, my weakest shot. I generally understand what I do wrong. I make contact with the ball way too close to the body, don't get enough shoulder rotation, poor weight transfer, yada yada yada. Above all though, for me at least, it's just never felt comfortable. And so like any average tennis player, rather than spend time fixing it, I'm trying a new racket hoping it will solve my problem. And funny enough, having a separate grip for each of my hands instantly felt intuitive. I had mentioned earlier the potential for added leverage, and indeed, the second handle gave my left arm a more stable platform to drive through the ball, resulting in what I felt to be improved force generation and a more natural feeling motion.
Woo! That feels good.
All things considered, things were going pretty well. So this became my routine for the next 10 days, and very quickly, I began to find a groove. Hit after hit, my confidence and competency with the freestyle grew, and before I knew it, I no longer felt as though I was just reviewing some bizarro racket for my channel. I felt as though I was reconnecting with my backhand. Now granted, it undoubtedly helped that I was forcing myself to play day after day, which is considerably more frequent than my normal schedule. But by day 10, I was truly hitting my backhand as well as, if not better than, I ever have.
Did you kick me off?
Lightning.
That's okay. I'll get off.
Of course, that's not to say things were going perfectly. Though my forehand worked well enough, I found that I wasn't quite getting the same level of control I was used to. And with a match approaching, that posed a real issue, given that it's always been the strongest part of my game. I mentioned earlier how polished and professional the racket's construction felt, and it is indeed a high-quality product. But as I began to suspect while hitting, the structural design of a dual-handled racket inherently sacrifices some of the stability you'd get from a standard one. And I couldn't shake that slight feeling of disconnect when making contact with the ball. Finally, what began as a major issue actually transformed into what I believe to be this racket's greatest asset, the serve. Yeah, once I grasped that I was meant to use the front handle for serving, not the one I'd been using for ground strokes, I was finding it extremely difficult to even get the ball over the net. Again, because the racket's design alters your contact angle, it required me to compensate by kicking the ball up to an almost uncomfortable degree. And for days, I struggled to land even a handful of successful serves. After enough failed attempts though, something finally clicked. And suddenly, the steep contact angle stopped being a limitation. It was an advantage.
That is some insane kick, I swear to God.
See, the racket in a sense had acted as a training tool, limiting me only to serves that met minimum height and pace requirements. Once I met those, my kick serve felt alive, and I ultimately finished the 10th and final day of practice with mixed feelings. My game felt good, but my confidence was shaky. Was 10 days really enough time to master this thing? Well, if anyone could prove it was possible, it was Dan. With a family to support, a master's degree in progress, and a full-time coaching role, the elder brother had only weeks to practice with the original natural model before their initial slate of futures and challenger level tournaments. But to the both of them, it made little difference.
And we were a tough team to beat. And the fact was, any racket we were using, I didn't care if we were using paddles, we would have been intense and out there to beat you. We were just competitive at whatever we were using. But I remember that specifically.
Fueled by their love of the game and mutual desire to compete, the duo finally made inroads onto the professional scene, quickly working their way up from minor league futures and challengers and into ATP level, even Grand Slam events, success that propelled their previous non-existent doubles rankings into the top 200, and in Brian's case, top 100 worldwide. Myself? I can't even fool myself into thinking I'm any good at this sport. But against an opponent I'm normally evenly matched against, and playing as well as I have been for a while, could the second handle be the key to an easy win? Not likely. I was making nice contact with the ball, and more satisfyingly, I didn't double fault once the entire match. But very quickly, I'd realized I'd overlooked some pretty obvious mistakes while training, one of which you've likely noticed. I thought the element of surprise and secretive training would be a fun aspect to the video, and maybe even a tactical advantage. But turns out, hitting with a ball machine is a much different experience than playing an actual human opponent. And despite my best efforts to mix up the machine's pace and direction, robots are no substitute for real people. This manifested in a couple ways. As covered earlier, forehands are hit while holding the back handle, but serves require you to hold the front. So you're kind of forced to flip the racket in your hands between these two shots. This isn't difficult in practice, but when attempting to serve and play points with a freestyle for the first time ever, it was mentally taxing to remember and stay focused on. Far worse than that were overheads, which follow the same concept. My opponent caught on to my ineptitude fairly early on, resulting in him lobbing each time I approached the net. But unlike serving, in the heat of the moment, I just forget to switch grips. Every single time. Sadly though, this all paled in comparison to what I considered to be my greatest stumbling block, which, as you can guess, was my backhand. Call it nerves or yips or poor ball machine preparation, but the free-flowing and confident shot just one day prior was replaced with the once again jerky mess that we saw on day one. Rather than attempt the shot, I opted subconsciously to merely run around and hit forehands when possible. And when forced to hit one, I often reacted with a pathetic slice or chip, which itself wasn't practiced. Though my strokes loosened up after some time and I finally began to get a good feel for the match ball, the damage by then was already done. And honestly, I walked off the court fairly disappointed. Not in the racket or even my performance, but in my own ignorance about how to properly prepare for this match, and for this video. But did any of that matter? Not really. The racket had more than proved itself by this point to be a viable tool for players in search of specific answers that conventional gear simply can't provide. It's not for everyone, that much I can attest to. And as we saw in my match, it's not a solution to a fundamentally flawed shot. I had proven that with enough practice, the racket had provided me a solid foundation. One that, in my view, actually aided my backhand more than a traditional racket ever did. My downfall, however, was not having trained with it in a point play setting beforehand, a completely different style of tennis. Though Brian and Dan's playing days as a professional team only lasted a few short years, my time speaking with them recently shed light on one final perspective that I hadn't considered, a factor which underscores their continued passion for the racket and overall concept to this day. Yes, any player like myself can fairly quickly learn to use and possibly benefit from what a two-handled racket like the freestyle has to offer. But ultimately, mastering new systems as an adult is no easy task. Their vision is for the next generation to grow up with rackets like the freestyle in hand, like Brian's student, Tennyson Whiting. For him, the freestyle isn't weird or experimental, it's just his racket, and he's managed to squeeze nearly every drop of performance from the racket's unorthodox design. I say nearly because Lionel's original intent was for new players to use the racket to develop completely symmetrical strokes, a lofty goal that remained out of reach even for Brian, despite his hybrid ambidextrous play. While that's yet to be seen, I'm here to declare that the two-handled racket does indeed exist. It's as visually ridiculous as you might expect, and yet, once you play with it, you might start to question what a normal racket is even supposed to be. If you're interested in watching my full interview with Brian and Dan, where we dive much deeper into their personal stories and the history of the racket than I could fit into this video, I've uploaded the entire conversation onto Nebula, our independent, creator-owned streaming platform. If you're not a member yet, Nebula actually just introduced a 3-day free trial, so there's no reason not to check it out. This video is not sponsored, but if you do sign up using my link below, it's a great way to support Cult Tennis and everything I make going forward.